How do I follow that? Well, I want to start with the story of my first memory of this scripture. This scripture is supposed to be about every 3 years, according to our lectionary. And so, from the Gospel of Mark, we are looking at all the sections, or many of the sections of Mark this summer. Mark is known for being one of the writers who uses miraculous events, such as healing people, for the purpose of pointing people to God. Not just so people are healed, but so they get to know our God. That's why Mark wrote the various scriptures. So, I did the calculations, and it was 41 years ago that I first heard this scripture. But 41 years is not divisible by 3. So I started to follow that and realized that was just a rabbit trail to get me taken away from the scripture. The point is, I heard this scripture many years ago. It was at the time I was trying to figure out about whether to go into Brethren volunteer service or not. I was trying to determine if I should head out of the only town I had ever known and go further away from home. Now, as I read the scripture this time and hear that a prophet is not respected in his or her own community, I thought, was I looking for respect? But no, I was 21, 22. That wasn't the issue. I think I was looking more for permission to leave the place that I had always known and follow this inkling to do service in the name of the church and Jesus. Oh, my life would have been so different if I had not gone into Brethren volunteer service. Well, I don't know who I would have been. For it was in volunteer service that I received a call to pastoral ministry and became who I am now. I followed my toes and walked on out of that town. You know, it was only a couple weeks ago that I headed off to annual conference. And at annual conference, it included the worship service that you saw last Sunday. Some of you saw it here on this screen as we were seeing it in Cincinnati. And most of you at least got to see the sermon by Leonard Sweet, who talked about being doers of the word, rather than just being people who are there, who come and sit, but we are to go and do. Well, that was one of the high points of annual conference, but another one is one I really enjoyed as well. It was the professional growth event for the ministers. Diana Butler Bass. Oh, and I was so pleased that I kept following my toes down that hall. But after the first hour, I was so depressed. I wanted to get up and follow my toes right out of that room. But don't do that yet. I want to do a summary of what I heard because I am so excited. And so I brought a few slides along. Lucas is going to show them. But remember, don't follow your toes out of here yet. The first one. These slides are all on the topic of gratitude and the changing religious landscape in the United States. The 2 circles represent who is affiliated with churches between at two different time points, 2003 and 2019. With the two circles, here's what I want you to note. In 2003, Protestants represented 50% of the people in the United States. By 2017, it was down to 36%. The next slide, it's another changing the landscape. This time, it divides all Christians into groups. Now, there has been the perception that the evangelical Christian groups, if only we were more of an evangelical Christian denomination, then we would still be growing. Not so. Even the evangelical Protestants, like the Southern Baptist, they are losing their share of people as well. And all the numbers have gone down, whether it's Catholic, mainline Protestants, all those are the red lines that are going down. Oh, but if one of you is smart, you will see there's a line that goes up, a blue line. Can you read it from back there? Unaffiliated. Those are the people who no longer connect with any church or religious group. Not really good news for us in the church. The next slide talks about who the unaffiliated are. There are some people who say those who no longer claim a church, it's just the young people, right? The younger millennials, and it's 36% of them in 2014 who are no longer attending a church. But look, even the silent generation, their percentage of no longer attending a church is going up by 2%. And the baby boomers, it's going up by 3%. Generation X is going up by a larger percentage that are no longer choosing to attend worship, to walk into a church building or a temple or other organized groups. So, this is where I saw these, and by this point, I was depressed. There's a group that has done most of this research, Pew Research Center. They're the group that I've known about for years. They do the research mainly about people who sit in pews, like y'all are sitting in pews. I think that's where the name came from. The people who come and sit in pews. Well, I think there's some irony in the fact that Pew Research decided that maybe they weren't asking the right questions. And this is where things change. Instead of asking who's sitting in pews, in other words, who the religious tend to be, they change the question to ask about who spiritual people are today. Not who's sitting in the pews, but what's going on in people's hearts. Listen to these statistics. The next one begins 4 different questions that are being asked. And there is the longitudinal study, meaning they have 2007 with some of these, and 2014. It's showing an increase. What's the question that's showing an increase? The percentage of adults who feel a sense of spiritual peace and well-being. Between 2007 and 2014, there are more adults in the U.S. who can name a sense of spiritual well-being during the past week. You can track them. There's other categories there about last month, last year. Not paying attention to those right now. So the increase in people who are feeling a sense of spiritual peace and well-being. The next question. The percentage of adults who in the last week felt a sense of wonder about the universe. 56%. And I couldn't find the chart, but Diana Butler Bass said that this number had gone up as well. That's over half, over 50% of the U.S. population. And in a separate chart, the people who most feel that sense of awe about the universe, about what God created, millennials are number one. Those are our people in the 20s and 30 age category, roughly. And the second highest group is the baby boomers, which some of you can identify with. A sense of awe. Think about that. What have you seen when you've looked outside recently? Okay, third question, because we already have spiritual peace and well-being, a sense of awe. Number 3 is a strong sense of gratitude. And this chart is 2014. 78% of people feel a sense of gratitude. They break it down by Christians. Christians are at 82%. But even the atheists are at 60% of feeling a sense of gratitude. I'm not sure who the gratitude is to, but there's still a sense of gratitude. Okay, that's 3 of the questions. The fourth one. Have you in the last week thought of the meaning that should be purpose of, have you in the last week thought about the meaning or purpose in life? 55% in 2014 said yes. Thank you, Lucas. Now, keep following the toes. What's the next stop? This is good news. I was impressed that there still is a desire in our world for people to understand our spiritual selves. It may be in a different form than previous generations. It may not be in the same way that your grandparents experienced it, nor that the grandchildren are experiencing spirituality. And then I made the connection. Do you remember when Jesus went into his temple? The temple he had grown up in. The temple he was known as Mary's son, the carpenter's son. They could name brothers and sisters. And the words he preached when he unrolled the scroll, the actions he did in healing people were not what the people in the temple expected. They wanted Jesus to come in and just act the way he used to and maybe say something nice. But instead, as it is recorded in Matthew, he did words such as, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." I think it scared his next door neighbors. "Anointed me to bring good news to the poor, proclaim release to the captives, recovery of sight to the blind, let the oppressed go free." Oppressed. Maybe there were business owners who were doing the oppressing. "Proclaim the year of the Lord." Healing those who were sick. And this is not what they wanted their little boy to say, who used to sit quietly at children's time or sit quietly with his parents during the temple services. And so they hated him. It got me wondering, what might those people be saying from the temple the next day? The next day after they had time to think about this Jesus who came into their service? Were they still angry? Might they have actually had time to think and be impressed that he actually grew up in their midst? And maybe there is a Spirit of God about him. Did they realize that this was the Jesus who came into the world to point the way to God? That he would suffer not only because of their reactions, but in many other ways in this world, and die so that we might truly find life. I wonder if the message that Jesus brought to this temple might be like this dramatic shift that we are seeing in our world right now. People who are spiritual, but might not be sitting in the pews for pew research to record. Think about yourself. Take these 4 questions with you this week. Are you a spiritual person? This coming week, keep track. Do you feel a sense of spiritual peace and well-being? Did you observe awe in our God-created universe? Yesterday I saw 5 caterpillars on our deal plant and was in such awe of how that happened. 3, this week, will you experience a strong sense of gratitude? And 4, will you think about the meaning and purpose of life? The shock that happened that day with Jesus in the temple, they hated him. They at least didn't understand what was going on. And I think in 2018, we are still wondering about what's going on in the church and the changes in the church around us. I still say the church is a really good place to find people who are seeking spiritual peace, awe, and gratefulness, and the purpose of life. And you're able to talk about some of those issues with the person sitting beside you. But yet, the church, like the early temple, we sometimes get off track and we miss seeing the God-given prophets, or miss seeing the things and get caught up in our tasks, and then need to listen to the prophets and the visionaries and go back to finding Christ in our midst, in our neighborhood, in our world, and going. See, many years ago, I never realized how powerful one scripture might be. That one sermon that I remembered from my childhood of being in our birth hometowns or being in our chosen hometowns. I pray that God still touches you so that you might keep following your toes and put your toes in the footsteps of Jesus. Then you can be both spiritual and religious. Amen.